Let's talk about one of the great, well, paradoxes of World War II air combat. We're going to dive into an aircraft that was, at first, literally mocked by its enemies. They called it a flying bathtub. And yet, it ended up becoming one of the most destructive, most important weapons in the entire Allied arsenal. This is the story of a fighter that had to learn how to think and hit like a bomber.
So you have to ask yourself this question. It sounds pretty simple to us today, right? But back in the 1940s, this idea was revolutionary. Military thinking was incredibly rigid. Fighters fought other fighters, end of story. Bombers dropped bombs. You just didn't mix the two. But what happens if you start blurring those lines? What if one plane with one pilot could deliver a knockout punch to tanks and trains on the ground and then turn around and fight its way home? Answering that question, well, it would change warfare forever.
Okay, so let's put ourselves in the cockpit for a second. It's September 1944. The sky over the Netherlands is just black with Allied aircraft for Operation Market Garden. You're a German pilot, scrambling to get airborne. You climb to meet them, expecting the usual, the big B-17's, the nimble Spitfires. But then you see it. It's a squadron of P-47 Thunderbolts. Big, brutish American fighters. But something's wrong. Strapped under their wings are bombs. Lots of them. A total of 2,500 pounds of ordnance. Now, you know your aircraft, and you know that's about half the payload a four-engine B-17 Flying Fortress carries. On a fighter. To a Luftwaffe pilot, this was just impossible. The clumsy fighter they'd laughed at just a year ago had become a monster they never, ever saw coming.
To really get why this was such a shock, we have to rewind the clock a bit, back to when the P-47 first showed up in 1943. When it arrived in Europe, the German pilots weren't just unimpressed, they were, frankly, contemptuous. To them, it seemed to confirm everything they believed about American design. Big, heavy, powerful, sure, but totally lacking the elegance and finesse they prized in their own engineering.
And this right here really tells the story. The P-47 Thunderbolt was an absolute beast. I mean, look at that, 10,000 pounds empty. That's nearly double its main rival, the legendary Messerschmitt Bf-109. It was basically built around this massive 18-cylinder radial engine, and its bulky frame earned it nicknames like the Jug and, of course, the less-than-flattering flying bathtub. To the German aces, it looked less like a thoroughbred fighter and more like a truck with wings.
And you know what? Their first combat reports seemed to prove them right. German intelligence officially wrote it off as mediocre at best. Its climb rate was sluggish, it was a terrible turner. A German pilot could literally fly circles around it if they could sucker it into a low-speed dogfight. Its weight just became a huge liability. And maybe worst of all, its early combat range was a measly 125 miles. That made it pretty much useless for escorting bombers deep into Germany. So the verdict was in. The Thunderbolt was a dud, a failed experiment.
But this is where the story gets really interesting. Because the Germans had correctly identified the P-47's biggest weakness, its massive size and weight. What they completely failed to understand was that this supposed fatal flaw was also its greatest, most game-changing strength. They were looking at a plane in its infancy, and they couldn't see the incredible potential hidden right there in plain sight.
So here's the secret. The designer, a man named Alexander Kartveli, had built this thing to be unbelievably tough. The Army asked for a plane that could handle 6 Gs of force. Kartveli gave them one stressed for 12 Gs. It was built around a solid core of steel tubing and armor plate. It was, in a word, over-engineered. And that's what made it so heavy. But it also meant it could take an insane amount of damage and still bring its pilot home. And, critically, those incredibly strong wings, they could carry things they were never ever meant to.
This is how that incredible transformation happened. And what's amazing is that this wasn't some grand strategy dreamed up in a boardroom in Washington. No, this was pragmatic, bottom-up innovation. It happened in the mud and oil of forward airfields in England. Pilots coming back from missions started using their .850 caliber machine guns to strafe German trains and trucks. Then some clever ground crews figured out, hey, I bet we could rig some bomb shackles to these strong wings. By late '43, they were carrying 500-pound bombs. Then came the rockets, which gave a single P-47 the firepower of an entire artillery battery. This plane was evolving, right there on the front lines, into something totally new.
So by the time we get to the D-Day invasion in June of 1944, the P-47's transformation is complete. It's not just an escort fighter anymore. Oh no. It had become the absolute workhorse of tactical air power. And for the German army on the ground, it was an absolute nightmare, a tactical problem they just had no answer for.
Just stop and think about that number for a second. 525 tons. On a single day, June 6, 1944, P-47s dropped that much high explosive on German positions in Normandy. This wasn't strategic bombing hitting some factory hundreds of miles away. This was tactical destruction, happening right there on the front lines, literally shaping the course of the battle for the soldiers on the ground in real time.
And the sheer volume of their effort was just staggering. P-47s flew almost 2,000 missions on D-Day alone, way more than any other fighter. They were just everywhere, hitting artillery positions, blowing up fuel dumps, tearing apart troop convoys trying to get to the beaches. The very same plane the Germans had written off was now dominating the battlefield from treetop level.
So what did those German pilots think now? Well, here's a quote from Gunther Rahl, one of the top-scoring fighter aces in history, a true master of his craft. He knew the P-47 was a poor turner, but he also discovered its terrifying strength, its dive speed. That immense weight meant that once a P-47 got its nose down, nothing could catch it. Rahl said that when one of them was on his tail in a dive, there was literally nothing he could do. And in May of 1944, Rahl himself was shot down by P-47s. When one of your enemy's best pilots tells you he's helpless, you know you've built something special.
The P-47's most devastating performance probably came in August 44, at a place called the Falaise Pocket, where an entire German army got trapped. The Thunderbolts operated in constant relays, from dawn till dusk. One squadron would finish its attack and head home to rearm, and just as they left, another one would arrive over the target. There was no escape. Post-battle analysis showed that air power, mostly from P-47s, destroyed about a third of all German vehicles in that pocket. They didn't just defeat an army, they utterly annihilated its ability to move, to fight, to exist.
So in the end, the P-47 did a lot more than just win battles. Its incredible success fundamentally changed the way military thinkers thought about air power. The story of this overweight, underestimated fighter is really the story of the birth of the modern Air Force.
Before the P-47, as we said, the doctrine was rigid. You had fighters and you had bombers. The P-47 just shattered that idea. It proved that a single aircraft could be a jack of all trades, and actually a master of them too, depending on the mission. This concept, what we now call the multi-role fighter, became the new gold standard. Suddenly, a fighter that could only fight was only half as valuable as one that could fight and bomb.
And this slide shows you exactly why that concept took over. The numbers are just stunning. It wasn't just about tactical flexibility, it was about brutal efficiency. Look at this. To deliver 1 ton of bombs, a P-47 cost a tiny fraction of what a B-17 heavy bomber cost. It needed far fewer ground crew to keep it flying, and most importantly, it exposed far, far fewer airmen to danger. You could get the same destructive effect on the battlefield for a fraction of the cost in both money and, more importantly, in lives. This wasn't just a new tactic, it was a whole new business model for waging war. And that new model, that new philosophy, it shaped everything that came next. You can draw a straight line, a direct lineage from the P-47 Thunderbolt to the combat jets flying today. Its descendants, like the F-84 Thunderjet and the legendary A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, they carried its DMA forward. And the idea finds its ultimate expression in planes like the F-35, a single aircraft designed from the ground up to do absolutely everything. That entire way of thinking, it started with the humble flying bathtub.
And here it is. This is the ultimate payoff. For years, the Allies had been sending huge fleets of heavy bombers to pound German factories, a strategic effort to cripple their industry from the inside. But the P-47s achieved a different, maybe even more effective kind of strategic victory. By relentlessly, systematically destroying every train, every truck, every bridge they could find, they completely paralyzed the German army. It got to the point where, by early 1945, German forces simply could not move during the day. Reinforcements couldn't get to the front. Fuel couldn't get to the tanks. This constant tactical pressure created a total strategic collapse.
And that really leaves us with a final question to think about. The German military philosophy of the time prized perfection in specialized roles. The perfect interceptor, the perfect dive bomber. The P-47 came to represent the complete opposite. The incredible power of pragmatic, messy, radical adaptability. It was never the best dogfighter. It wasn't the best bomber. But it became good enough at everything to change the world. And its story is this powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest strength isn't being perfect at one thing, but having the toughness and the flexibility to become whatever the moment demands you to be.